Okay, let's dig into this. We've got a whole collection of sources here. Articles, notes, research, all swirling around this really baffling and honestly quite disturbing case.
Yeah.
It seems to have blown up again recently because of that viral image, right? The one comparing a young man who died back in 2012, Christopher Erick, with a body on display in an exhibition.
Exactly. And that image is like the tip of the iceberg. What the sources really lay out is this deeper, incredibly sad story. It's about his mother, Kim, and her, well, relentless fight to find out what truly happened to her son.
Right, because his death was suspicious from the start.
Very. But her fight now also centers on this shocking belief she has that his actual body is the one in that exhibition on display without her permission.
It's an extraordinary claim. So, okay, we've gone through all this material you gathered. Our goal today, for you listening, is to pull out the key facts, the insights, figure out what we know, what's still just unknown, and really get into the heart of this mystery.
Let's do it.
So first off, who is Christopher Todd Erick? The sources tell us he was born September 27, 1989 in Mesquite, Texas. So he was only 23 when all this happened.
Just 23. And his mother, Kim, paints this picture of him. Full of life, loved sports, very involved in his faith, went to church a lot.
Sounds like a typical young man.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
She describes his childhood as peaceful, says he was close to family and friends, happy, had plans, dreams. Crucially, she says, there were no signs of any serious issues that would point towards, well, what happened later.
That happy image becomes really important later, doesn't it?
It really does, because it clashes so starkly with some of the official lines later on. Now, the sources do mention his parents, Kim and Stephen, were divorced.
Okay.
And Christopher was living with his father, Stephen, in Houston. And the relationship between Kim and Stephen was apparently quite strained. Lots of disagreements noted in the materials.
Right. And then things seemed to take a turn in 2012, the year he died. His father decides to send him to this all-boys boarding school in Houston.
Yeah, and Kim's description of this school, based on the sources, is, well, she calls it suspicious.
Suspicious? What does that mean?
Well, the sources mention this school apparently had a dark reputation. There were reports kind of swirling around about abuse, even other young men connected to the school dying mysteriously.
Wow. Okay, so not exactly a comforting environment.
Not according to these accounts, no. And it feels really key, doesn't it? This young man Kim saw as happy and stable is suddenly put in a place that, at least according to some reports, felt potentially dangerous.
And it wasn't just the school itself. Kim claimed she was completely cut off from him.
That's a huge part of it.
Yeah.
She says Stephen ordered it, no visitors, no phone calls. She had zero contact.
She calls it forced isolation, like that was the first big red flag for her that something was really wrong.
Yeah, that term forced isolation comes up repeatedly in her accounts within the source material. And it raises serious questions, Why? Why cut off contact like that?
And there was something else happening at the school too, right? This thing about testosterone.
Yes, another really disturbing allegation from Kim, detailed in the sources. She claims Christopher was being given large doses of testosterone there.
For what reason?
That's the thing. She says there was no clear medical reason she knew of. She didn't get it, but she believed his father knew and approved it.
So you've got this school with a bad reputation, the isolation, these unexplained testosterone doses. Kim clearly felt things were spiraling.
Absolutely. From her perspective, presented at the sources, his whole situation changed drastically, alarmingly, and inexplicably. It really sets a grim stage.
And then the worst happens.
Yeah. The sources state that on November 8th, 2012, Christopher was found dead at his paternal grandmother's house in Houston. Still just 23.
Devastating for Kim, obviously.
Completely devastating. But that grief almost immediately turned into suspicion because the story of how he died, it started changing right away according to the material.
How so? What was the first story?
Initially, cardiac arrest. That was the first report.
Okay, which might make some sense given later findings.
Right. But as one source puts it, that official story quickly changed, sparking suspicion. The death certificate was revised.
To what?
Cyanide poisoning.
Whoa, okay, that's completely different. Cyanide, highly lethal.
Exactly. And crucially, the manner of death was marked undetermined. Authorities apparently suggested it could have been self-inflicted, maybe natural causes, but they couldn't say for sure. No conclusion.
So cardiac arrest is out, poison is in. Did toxicology confirm the cyanide?
Yes, toxicology confirmed cyanide was in his system. But how it got there? That's still a massive mystery according to all the sources.
Any other substances found?
The report apparently mentioned illegal substances, but didn't specify which ones. Another layer of uncertainty.
What about the autopsy itself? Did it find anything else besides the cyanide?
It did, and this has more complexity. The pathologist noted two significant medical conditions. First, coronary artery malformation, basically, an abnormal structure in a major heart artery that could reduce blood flow and increase cardiac risk, especially under stress.
Okay, so heart defect.
Right. And second, evidence of a recent myocardial infarction or heart attack. Damage to the heart muscle from lack of oxygen, estimated to be maybe a few hours to a day and a half old.
So he did have serious heart issues.
Yes. There was also a small tear found in the wall of his aorta, but that wasn't considered the direct cause of death.
So, with these heart problems documented, why did the cause of death officially become cyanide?
That's the pivot point. According to the sources, the pathologist initially did suspect the heart malformation might be the cause, but finding the cyanide, that shifted the narrative entirely.
So the poison trumped the heart condition.
Ultimately, yes. The pathologist concluded cyanide was the lethal factor. But, and this is critical for the whole mystery, they couldn't determine how. Intentional, accidental, was it given to him by someone else? Undetermined.
And they estimated the time of death.
The window was apparently somewhere between 6 and 24 hours before the autopsy was performed, which happened the morning after he was found.
So, with all this uncertainty, cyanide present but origin unknown, heart issues documented, what did the official investigation conclude? Did anyone get charged?
No. Despite Kim's suspicions, which the sources clearly state pointed right at the father, Stephen, authorities apparently found insufficient evidence. A grand jury looked at the case in 2013, but they chose not to indict anyone. So officially, the cause of death stayed undetermined.
And that's where Kim just couldn't accept it.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
This is really the core of her fight, detailed in the sources. She completely rejects that undetermined conclusion. She argues Christopher had no reason to give up. Active, church, friends seem stable.
Yeah.
The changing death certificate, the lack of answers about the cyanide, it just cemented her belief that something sinister, something criminal had happened. She believed it was murder.
And she specifically suspected the father, Stephen.
Directly, yes. The sources detailed her reasons. The way she was told about the death felt off to her. She claimed Stephen didn't tell her right away. And then the really big one. She says Stephen told her Christopher's body was already cremated. But then, he never gave her the ashes.
No ashes.
Never. Kim found this incredibly suspicious. Why no viewing? Why cremate so quickly without her involvement? It screamed cover-up to her, suggesting Stephen was hiding something major.
And her suspicions also extended back to that boarding school.
Definitely. She points to its questionable reputation, those reports of abuse, the testosterone doses.
Did she think the testosterone was linked to the cyanide?
The sources say there's no concrete evidence of that link. But Kim wondered if it contributed to his heart problems, maybe. What really shook her, according to the material, was finding out other young men from that same school had also died mysteriously.
That does sound alarming, like a pattern.
It reinforced her belief that the school was dangerous and somehow potentially involved.
Okay, so years go by, Kim's fighting, suspecting, but getting no official answers. And then comes this absolutely shocking moment described in the sources. The exhibition.
Yeah, this is where it takes a really bizarre turn. Years later, Kim visits the Real Bodies exhibition in Las Vegas. You know, the one with the plastinated human bodies? Controversial show.
Right, I've heard of it.
So she's walking through, and she stops at display number 27. It's a plastinated body posed like the thinker.
And none?
And she looks at it, and according to the sources, she becomes utterly convinced, absolutely certain, that body is her son Christopher.
She believes the body is Christopher, based on what?
Undeniable resemblance, she claims. Height, weight, even the facial structure, despite, the lack of skin through plastination. She apparently brought photos, teen photos, one from just before he died, and compared them. It just clicked for her. This was him.
That's hard to even imagine. Did others see the resemblance?
She shared the comparison photos online, and the sources say her followers agreed the resemblance was striking, too strange to ignore, even knowing how hard it is to identify plastinated bodies definitively.
Did she confront the exhibition staff? Ask them?
She did. Asked for the identity of the person in display 27, but they reportedly told her they couldn't share that information. Confidentiality, respect for the deceased, privacy policies.
How did Kim take that?
She found it deeply suspicious. Her argument, laid out in the sources, is if these bodies were all voluntarily donated, like the exhibit claims, why the secrecy? Why not release donor names or at least confirm the origins?
That lack of transparency fuels her suspicion.
Exactly, it made her dig. The Sources say she started searching online, found these obscure forums discussing the exhibition.
And found what?
Disturbing claims, anonymous posts. Someone claiming to be a former employee alleged the bodies were acquired illegally with no real oversight. Another story she mentions involves a young worker she supposedly spoke to, who allegedly confirmed staff knew some bodies came from questionable sources, though without giving specifics. It's like her personal search happened in this existing vein of doubt and suspicion around the exhibition itself.
But identifying the body definitively is the problem, right? Plastination.
The process replaces tissues with polymers. Sources say it makes DNA testing incredibly difficult, maybe impossible.
Did she ask for a DNA test?
She requested a test on display on the exhibition was the same process made it unfeasible. She argues if they have nothing to hide, why not cooperate somehow? Issue a formal statement, something. Their silence, the sources know, just makes things look worse.
Has the exhibition responded publicly to her claims at all?
Reportedly, no direct response, despite the media attention and social media buzz. Just silence on that specific claim.
So Kim took her fight public in a big way.
She did. The sources mention a public Facebook post aimed directly at Steve, demanding answers, accusing him both of being suggesting he sold the body.
Wow, that's
And she reiterated the claim about cutting off contact, isolating Christopher at the school, laying him off. And she launched a change.org petition commanding the She sees the cyanide as proof that was going to create a white people.
And this piece went viral again recently, around 2025.
Yeah, the sources indicated research was partly demanding
Has this put pressure on the real body investigation?
It seems so. The sources suggest a lack of strict regulation in the industry. Critics argue this lack of transparency allows it to relate itself like body trafficking. It connects Christopher's specific case to these bigger systemic worries.
And there are other disturbing stories swirling online, too, not just Christopher's.
Right, the sources mention these, though they stress they're unverified. A man thinking his pregnant wife's body was on display. A story about an Asian journalist who vanished after visiting a museum, her body supposedly appearing later. Unproven, but they fuel that wider theory of an illicit network.
It's all very dark. But Kim keeps fighting.
Relentlessly, based on the material. She's built this online community, people sharing outrage, calling for regulatory change. Her petition is still pushing for DNA testing, accountability. She apparently plans to take it to higher courts if she can.
Okay, so let's step back and look at the main theories that have emerged from all this, based purely on what's in the source material. We need to be impartial here.
Definitely. Theory 1, which is Kim's core belief, is essentially murder by father. The idea is Stephen killed Christopher, maybe with cyanide, then somehow arranged for the body to end up in the exhibition, possibly for money. Kim points to the cremation issue. No ashes. The isolation at school is part of a plan. Maybe even the testosterone was meant to mask something or create a health issue.
What are the weaknesses of that theory, according to the sources?
Well, the big one is no direct evidence. Nothing showing Stephen administered cyanide or sold the body. And cyanide poisoning could be accidental or voluntary. The cremation is suspicious, yes, but maybe explainable otherwise, though Kim dismisses that.
Okay, theory 2.
This one focuses on the school. Accidental death at the boarding school.
How would that work?
Maybe Christopher died due to negligence, or some kind of experiment gone wrong linked to the testosterone or other substances. Cyanide could have been a chemical accident at the facility. Then maybe the body was sent to the exhibition to cover it all up.
Downsides to this.
Sources point out there are no confirmed records of cyanide deaths at that specific school mentioned. And using a public exhibition as a disposal method for a cover-up seems incredibly risky for the school.
Makes sense. What about the idea that it was self-inflicted or accidental, closer to the initial official suggestions?
That's theory 3, voluntary or accidental self-administration. Maybe Christopher took the cyanide himself, intentionally or by accident, possibly related to those unspecified illegal substances found. His heart condition could have made him more vulnerable.
And the main counter-argument there.
Kim's absolute insistence he had no reason to. And again, how did he get access to cyanide?
Yeah.
It's not exactly common.
And the final broadest theory.
Systemic body trafficking. This suggests Christopher was just one victim of a larger illegal network supplying bodies. That exhibitions like real bodies might get bodies from illicit sources, not just donations. Kim thinks Stephen might have collaborated with such a network. The other unverified stories, like the pregnant wife or the journalist, are sometimes used online to support this idea of a bigger problem.
But the big challenge here is proof.
Exactly. Plastination makes ID nearly impossible. The exhibition insists on voluntary donation, but hasn't offered public, verifiable proof. It remains speculative.
This whole case has clearly sparked a much bigger debate, hasn't it, about the ethics of these exhibitions.
Absolutely. Calls for boycotts, demands for transparency, and Kim Erick Smith, through all her efforts documented in these sources, has become this really powerful voice demanding accountability, not just for Christopher, but for the whole industry. Her story clearly resonates.
So where does it all stand now as of May 2025, based on the material?
Sources indicate no real movement on reopening the criminal case based on Kim's claims. But the public pressure is still there. Real Bodies is still operating, but definitely facing more criticism.
And the body in display 27.
There's an unconfirmed suggestion in some sources it might have been removed or swapped out because of the controversy, but again, that's not confirmed.
So it's more than just a true crime story.
Oh, much more. It's about a mother's fight, unbelievable loss, and these really dark questions about an industry that deals in human bodies. Kim believes her son was murdered and is on display. And without answers, the sources describe her life as an endless nightmare.
So wrapping up this deep dive, based on the sources you shared, we've covered a suspicious death, a mother's powerful conviction, these swirling theories, and these really significant questions about the body exhibition industry.
And we've seen that despite everything Kim has done, the support she has, the official story remains undetermined, no charges filed. And the identity of that body in display case 27, still unconfirmed by the exhibition.
It really leaves you, the listener, thinking about some heavy things that come straight out of this material, doesn't it? Like, what does this case tell us about balancing science or education displays with industry regulation, transparency, and just the basic right of a family to know what happened to their loved one?
Yeah. How much transparency should we demand when human remains are involved? Set of question with no easy answers.
Definitely something to reflect on.
Indeed.
That concludes our deep dive into this incredibly complex and tragic story based on the source material provided.